Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar to go over and introduce the opportunity that Virginia Sea Grant and our Go Virginia partners are putting on the street for um, $2 million of support to be working collaboratively with industry on some exciting new adaptation innovations that are forthcoming and are going to be tested on some waterfront properties here in Virginia. The three folks and what we're going to do today. So I'm the director of Virginia Sea Grant. I'll be giving you the quick overview of the statement of qualifications ask that's out on the street now. Towards the end of the presentation, after questions, we're going to pivot, and Paul Battaglia, a partner of ours with Clark Nexon, will have a parallel conversation about research capacity in this domain and opportunities that exist in that space. And Sabine Rogers is our strategic partnership coordinator here at Virginia Sea Grant, and also a project manager on this project too. And we are here to answer your questions. So for this $1 million opportunity in the statement of qualifications, funding is being pooled from two sources: Virginia Sea Grant, and Sea Grant is a federal state partnership with our federal funding from NOAA. We're a 6-university coalition headquartered here at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science at William and Mary, but Old Dominion University, Virginia Tech, UVA, George Mason University, Virginia Commonwealth University are all members of Virginia Sea Grant. And so we're pooling some of our federal dollars with Go Virginia funding. And Go Virginia is a state economic development funding source. And Sea Grant leads a team that has secured an award from the state level Go Virginia to be launching a coastal resilience and adaptation economy. So supporting emerging businesses and emerging innovations and ideas about adapting our coastlines to more water and living with flooding, living with the impacts of climate change. And given that Virginia is feeling some of these impacts a few years before neighboring states and other states around the country will be coastal states, that presents a unique opportunity to have the solutions that get generated here have a market globally. And I think that's what the Go Virginia economic development community has been excited about, and is seeing the coastal Virginia region overall, both the rural coastal areas up here in what Go Virginia calls their Region 6, as well as the Hampton Roads urban and suburban areas in the Go Virginia Region 5 location. So as part of that initiative, that project, there's several pieces, one of which is the statement of qualifications. So I kind of want to put it a little bit in a broader context for you, so you see how this fits in, the statement of qualifications and the next steps with the partnerships and collaborative research. One part has been a business plan competition, which our partner RISE has been leading for a suite of problems, issues that coastal rural Virginia faces, and asking the business community what innovative solutions they may have to those problems. And we're going to walk through some of those topical areas in a little bit. That competition has closed. We received 15 different innovative ideas from 12 different companies. They went through a first review and scaled that down to 7 finalists that will be making their business pitches later this month. And into early April, we'll have up to 5 or so finalists that will be receiving funding to implement their projects, their innovations. What we're also doing is matching those businesses with university capacity, and that's what this statement of qualifications starts that conversation. So Virginia Sea Grant is leading this piece, and it's the outreach and competition among universities, just asking initially for statements of qualifications on these topical areas. And I'll go through this in a little more detail in a moment too. The third component is testing the use of a network of waterfront fuel stations that exist in the Middle Peninsula, and thinking of that network as contributing to the R&D capacity and potentially a greater capacity in the region for collaborative research in this domain. The Public Access Authority and Virginia Sea Grant are leading this piece, and the Public Access Authority has over 50 properties in its portfolio on the waterfront in the Middle Peninsula, providing a lot of different opportunities for testing things in the field. And the fourth component is led by Old Dominion University, a business consortium leveraging conversations with the business community around best practices and a series of other priority topical areas in a set of workshops. So for this statement of qualifications, the higher educational institutions in Virginia are eligible applicants. We are looking to fund probably up to 5 two-year awards that could be in the 200, 250 K range each. There's no match requirement on these funds. There's no limit on the number of awards that could be issued to a single institution. There's a big emphasis on, obviously it's a matching and partnering with the business competition winners. The expectations of the university partners kind of fall in 2 categories. One is to be working closely with those businesses on kind of product validation and improvement. And that product could be their innovation, it could be their design, it could be a strategy, it could be technology. There's 7 finalists, and we'll have 5 from those. And that we working closely with them on that product, which is also why you're seeing us ask things like, what's your experience working with companies? What's your policies for intellectual property, things of that nature, your non-disclosure agreement policies at your universities. But the second part that's also equally important here is getting a feel for and assessing the impact of this intervention on that property scale resilience. Are we buying time for this property? Is it impacting the flooding that's taking place, the amount of erosion energy, wave energy, the other issues that relate to resilience for a coastal property, both in the short term and long term. And there's this 2-step process that we're going through here in the matchmaking effort. First has been this statement of qualifications, and where we're really interested in hearing about your scientific and technical capacity and interests, as well as your collaborative research experience with the private sector. There's a second stage that will come later that would be about matching university capacity with the business plan winners and the particular properties where they will be testing these things. Those properties we haven't identified yet because different companies will need different characteristics in a property. But once those companies are identified, we'll know the specific properties that they'll be working on. That comes at the next stage, where there'll actually be a work plan and budget developed. So the topical areas of interest and that we're asking you guys about fall into 3 buckets of thinking through coastal rural resilience issues. The first bucket relates to rural coastal flood management activities and thinking a lot about nature-based solutions, hybrid versions of living shorelines, shoreline stabilization issues broadly. And then within that, things like plant production that's supporting living shorelines. How do you increase the increase production rates at this stage. Issues about rural stormwater management, which are often right now, commonly they're ditches and they're at zero grade or very low grade and face a lot of challenges with tidal flooding and getting and backing up and um, just what are some of the opportunities in that. I will say that within the finalists at this stage, we're interested in hearing your qualifications across all these topical areas, and you can submit as many narratives for each of these topical areas as you'd like. But, excuse me, let me restate that. You can submit a narrative for a single for each topical area you can submit a narrative for. There's nothing that keeps you from submitting a narrative on all of the topical areas if you want individual narratives. But you wouldn't, for example, submit 2 narratives on nature-based solutions and shoreline stabilization. You'd submit 1. The second bucket of categories relate to protection of existing buildings or new buildings and properties. And there's sort of 4 topical areas there. One is a bit more forward-looking. It's thinking about what would living on the shoreline 100 years from now look like? What would be a highly integrated design that thinks about open water, living shoreline marsh, landscaping in the front of the building, and the building? And if that was collectively thought of as a single system, might we design something in a different way? Second topical area is more short-term and a little more grounded, is thinking about beneficial reuse of dredge materials. And these are rural streams and creeks and systems that don't always have the same issues of some of the urban dredging of rivers and systems, but also certainly have nutrient implications. There's thinking through the existing home infrastructures that are out there, the buildings that are there now, and how what rehab options exist to kind of help a home live with water more often. And then the 4th topical area has been access, issues of how do you get to those properties? What are the road access? What are water access? Just how do you get to properties where there are times when in a lot of these coastal rural spaces, flooding on the road is preventing you from getting access to a property that otherwise might be viable. And the 3rd category is the thinking about water use as human use of water in these rural coastal locations where you're getting more flooding, you're getting more saltwater intrusion, you have wells, you have septic systems, there are nutrient load issues associated with flooding and in these systems. How do you think about wastewater management in this location, septic systems? How do you think about drinking water? How do you think about gray water, black water, and reuse opportunities? So a suite of solutions in that space. And the ones that are highlighted right now, kind of nature-based solutions and shoreline stabilization, integrated design, beneficial reuse and dredge materials, homes that are living with more water and having to think about rehabbing, and septic systems and water systems. Those are the topical areas that the finalists are working in right now. Longer term, we have interest in thinking about statement of quals for all these topical areas in universities, but right now the ones that the business finalists are focused on are those. We aren't at a place of being able to announce those quite yet, a couple of weeks from that. So submissions, what is involved with a statement of qualifications, we're asking folks to be submitting these PDFs versions of a narrative, an 8-page narrative and 2-page CVs for all the key people. That reflects, one submission for a topical area, and you can submit on all the topical areas if you'd like. through the EC Grant portal. It's a proposal submission portal. So if you've been doing many of these online proposals, which we all do these days, you'll be pretty familiar with what that involves. But you'll go to that site and set up an account, start and register, and start submitting materials. We're interested in that scientific and technical capacity in each topical areas, and in particularly, would love to hear examples. We're not just wanting to hear, oh, we're really good at A, B, and C. We want to hear, we're good at A, and here's an example of where we've shown that we've been good at A, and we're good at B, and here's an example. Also, collaborative research experience with industry. Just your systems in place at your institution to work with industry, and your experience with that. I've already mentioned that the expectation is an 8-page narrative. It's kind of laid out in the call for the components of that, and it's due by March 31st. There's no budget being asked for at this stage, so and then it'll depend on your individual institutions, but in many cases that will mean there won't necessarily need to be a document that gets reviewed by an Office of Sponsored Programs or research office that has to clear a budget. That comes later at a work plan stage and a budget stage, and at that stage there certainly will need to be Office of Sponsored Programs kind of reviews, but we're hoping that they doesn't have to be at this stage. Before we pivot to Paul, we're going to open up the floor for questions from you folks. What I'll just note again is that one of the questions you'll see even in the narrative, and it sets up some of the work that Paul Battaglia is doing, is thinking through, there's this network of field stations that are emerging and exist in the Middle Peninsula, and there's the opportunity to expand and build Virginia's collaborative R&D capacity that leverages those field stations. What would that capacity look like? And that's a bit of what, and what would your needs be in that capacity? That's a bit of what Paul's question is, and there's an element of the narrative that relates to that too. So let me pause there. I'll stop sharing my screen. That these are my email and Sabine's email contact information if you have additional questions as you start working on this. And again, this recording will be available, and there's another webinar that we're doing on the 15th.
Troy, Jen Irish put a question for you regarding clarifying in the context of only one narrative per topical area. You might want to go back to your slide with the topical area.
Good. And I fumbled that one. So thank you, Jen, for giving me another chance. So 4, 6, 7, there's 7 topical areas here. Any institution could submit up to 7 narratives. I would focus on, and you can use narratives also as ways of embedding links to program areas and say, this is a center we have on this topical area, without having to spend a lot of the narrative time describing what that is. It's a short description with a link. I think you can use that that approach in a narrative if 8 pages is too limiting for one institution to talk about how it might address highly integrated design approach, for example, and the capacity that the institution has in that space.
And there's another question in the chat. How many proposals can each PI or university submit?
There is not a limit. Thank you for launching the chat function as a way of managing questions. That's probably the easiest while I'm sharing the screen, because I can't see everybody. But
can we ask questions without using the chat directly? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Absolutely.
hear you.
Okay,
Uh,
good. Thank you. I have a question about the second major category, protection of rural buildings and properties. And I'm looking at number 3, existing home rehab, living with more water. Uh, can you maybe shed some more light on this? Is this FEMA type of mindset where you are thinking about maybe putting protective walls around properties or protective shields that can protect property from floating debris hitting the possibly that has a potential of hitting a commercial building or somebody's home? And then does this involve instrumentation that would be installed, such as strain gauges, accelerometers, and so on, to measure the effect of the wave loadings or any floating debris that hits a structure, and so on and so forth? What is really the nature of this existing home rehab and the 50 properties that you're talking about?
yeah.
Uh,
So good question. And so the first first part of that is yes, we want to hear about qualifications at universities that are thinking about how you protect existing infrastructure and existing buildings on a property. Um, Specifically in the rural coastal context, and what businesses are emerging in this competition right now. Um, the 50 PAA properties have about 5 or 6 building homes on them now. Some are
I see.
occupied, some are not. Um, they are living with flooding. They're living
Ah,
with saltwater intrusion into wells and septic systems. They are thinking through what can you do in a building now, in addition to, I mean, shy of raising your building, or
yeah.
just what other new solutions are there. We do have a business working in that space right now that's thinking a lot about moisture damage in on a home from flooding, and what approaches can be taken to minimize that kind of damage.
Hmm.
That's the narrow opportunity that might be existing in the current business plan. But I think the broader question is there too: what qualifications exist in our state university systems to be thinking about protecting those existing homes and potentially rehabbing them and using different material sciences, materials as well. I think all that's in the realm. I saw a question. Let me go back to
There's a few
John.
more.
Yeah, thanks,
Uh,
John.
Where
Oh,
you want me to, if you want to roll through back through the chat, otherwise I've got them captured. I can just read them to you.
the next one I see is John Goodall. I
John
don't know if
Goodall, yeah.
is that the next one. Asked about what topical areas that the industry you have industry for now versus ones you hope to have industry partners in the future. Yeah, I think the one on this topical area slide, the ones that are in bold are some of the areas that we have businesses that are currently doing work, looking at nature-based solutions and shore stabilization, including various hybrid forms of shoreline, sometimes integrating and thinking about beneficial reuse of dredge materials in those efforts. I mentioned we have we have one business that's thinking about how an existing home could minimize moisture damage from flooding.
Mm.
We have several that are thinking about septic systems and and kind of treating and thinking through options for treating wastewater in a flood prone kind of area. We have one that is pulling together several of those elements and I'd say beginning stages of thinking about a highly integrated design. But I think this is the topical area where there's probably future, even greater future opportunities as well.
Next question is from Jess Whitehead. Are multi-institutional proposals allowable, or are PIs limited to collaborations within their own institution?
I think it is fair in your submissions to say that you've got experience working in multi-institutional collaborations and would welcome that if you wanted that opportunity. That it'll be a bit at the matchmaking stage next, once we see the specific needs, that we could also approach folks and ask that question. You know, are you interested and willing to work with another? Because two pieces of the puzzle don't exist in the same institution, and we'd be trying to facilitate that conversation some and see if that is even viable. So I would focus the narrative on your own institution, but certainly you could add a note to say that this is something you've had experience with and are would be interested in as well.
Next question is whether each proposal is restricted to one of the 7 topics or multiple topics.
That is a good question. I'm not sure we had been thinking beyond the. I think it's certainly possible and probably very likely that you folks have expertise in addressing issues that are not on this list, that didn't bubble up to the top of Coastal Rural Virginia's list of projects that that were then put into the business plan competition. So if you were going to be, since there's no limit on the number of narratives that you could submit, you could build a narrative around a totally different problem area that coastal rural contexts face that you think could be tested in a set of field stations in the Middle Peninsula, and put that on the table too. We may not be able to respond to that in the short term for the businesses that are in the mix now, but it feeds into the opportunities that we see, the longer term opportunity research and collaborative research opportunities that we see at these field stations, including the building interest among businesses to be working at these sites too. We're having a parallel set of conversations like this around capacity with industry as well.
I think, sorry, I'll reframe that, I guess, because I think the question is more about a single proposal coming forward. Are you restricted to only approaching one topic versus can you touch on multiple topics within a proposal? Not necessarily something new.
Yes, you can touch on multiple topics within.
Jen Irish asks, will you allow multiple institution narrative submissions or only for a single institution submission? I think you've touched on that.
Yes, you can submit multiple.
Carol Considine asks if there is one statement of interest per university with one application for each of the possible topic areas allowed, or are there unlimited and statement of qualifications and topic areas allowed?
Unlimited.
Will the proposal ideas for business competition winners be published?
Yes, we're anticipating in 2 weeks that the finalists for the rural business plan competition will be announced. That's the final 7, and they are going through a business plan pitch exercise the end of the month, and that by early April we'll know the final 5.
And then the final question that we've got, at least in the chat box, is can you distinguish between the statement of qualifications versus proposals for concepts and ideas? Are you looking for qualifications in these areas, or are you looking for ideas and approaches to propose in these topical areas?
At this stage, we're looking for the former, qualifications, scientific and technical capabilities, as well as experience working with industry. The proposal stage will be stage 2. And that will come after matchmaking that's identifying the specific needs identified by the winners of the business plan competition.
Naveed just put another question in the chat. Will proposal ideas for the 7 topical areas that don't make it to the final 5 be disqualified?
Don't make the disqualified. Not sure disqualified is the. I understand that fully. Let me first, and then Naveed, please chime in if I'm not hitting on what you're asking for here. There will be a matchmaking effort, and we do only see kind of 5 up to 5 kind of institutions working with the partner. Now, as Jess's question implied, there could potentially be a team that gets formed that works with the business, but there's only going to be those 5 projects that will move to a stage of putting their innovation into the field on a public access authority property and testing how it, both the product and its impact on resilience at that property scale. That said, what you're seeing in the statement of qualifications is also a survey of the capacity that exists in this state, and some keywords, things that are going to be feeding our efforts to continue to grow this capacity and continue to link businesses. There are prior winners of business plan competitions. There are businesses now that are in programs in the Middle Peninsula that are supporting adaptation activities and resilience activities, particularly around shoreline stabilization, all of which are continuing to be looking for and are welcoming the potential for public-private partnerships on these ideas. So I could see us continuing to help do some matchmaking and help with both seeking funding and potentially seeding some funding for additional activities afterwards. So in that sense, you're not disqualified for continued participation in this overall initiative, but for the specific available funding now for the business plan competition winners, then yeah, there'll only be a certain number of projects that go teams that go through to the full work plan and budget stage. Does that answer what you were? Yeah, there will be some that will not be selected.
I have another question. The 7 businesses that you have mentioned, how would a given proposer know what specific ideas or things that these 7 businesses want to pursue, so that the proposal ideas proposed by a given investigator are aligned with what these 7 businesses want? I mean, it could be like they are thinking about X types of things, and the proposer has some other ideas that are also apparently relevant, but may not be totally aligned with what these businesses are up to as far as their plans are concerned.
Yeah, that's why this is a statement of qualifications and not necessarily asking for proposals of ideas from the university on things that they might do out there. And that would mean, even if you folks are working in some topical areas that are beyond these topical areas, I would focus still on and you want to submit a narrative about that, because you see opportunity and potential. And what that would mean in this context is both the opportunity and potential to do some research on this in the field stations, but also the potential for commercialization opportunities. That's what Go Virginia cares about. And that's businesses that would be working in that space. You see those things on a topical area that's not listed here, and you choose to submit a narrative on that topical area.
Yeah.
I would focus the narrative again still on the qualifications of your center, institute, your program to to address that problem, not a particular proposal to do something on the PAA properties.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. That's good.
So Troy, I have a quick question regarding the timeline, if I may.
Mhm.
So you were saying there will be 2 stages. Stage 1 with for a statement of qualifications, and stage 2 for work plan. And this goes back to my question about the 7 versus the 5 finalists. So, how does the timeline of the 2 process for the business side and the academic proposal side will work?
Yeah.
So we will know the final 5 ideas that will definitely go through by late April, I believe you said, and the work plans are also due by late April. So I just wanted some clarification on that.
Yeah, no, good question. So, yeah, because there are things running in parallel here, right? The business plan competitions now kind of the pitches are being made in late March. So by early April, we'll know what those companies are. The matchmaking will be conducted based on kind of here's the capacity of universities and interests, and then conversations will get started. And so by mid to late April, we'll be launching conversations with those that have the potential match, and over the next month or two, finalizing a work plan and budget for that. And funding is in hand, so we could start a subaward from Virginia Sea Grant to the university immediately after kind of reaching an agreement on that, and start dates could be even in early as the summer.
Okay, thank you.
And I actually would anticipate that there will be some opportunities and need to do some work early to get a good feel for, once the companies are identified, then there's also a matchmaking going on there with the property in which they will apply their technology or their product to, and getting a sense for what's that property like right now, what's the baseline conditions out there, could take place really early before they actually even get their intervention onto the site, because there'll also be work we're doing with permitting agencies and the like to ensure that whatever they're proposing is going to get permitted and placed out there. Well, feel free to continue to noodle on this as you and any questions you have as you're putting statement of quals together. Feel free to shoot our way. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand over to Paul Battaglia to talk a little bit further about what opportunity is presented here to Virginia to kind of take this to the next level and thinking through those field stations and that R&D capacity. So I'm going to stop sharing. Paul, you're up.
Excellent. Thank you, Troy. Yeah, my name is Paul Battaglia. I'm an architect with Clark Nexen. We've been a partner in the Resiliency Network, particularly with Virginia Sea Grant, and we've enjoyed the collaboration to date. It's been very fruitful, and we're particularly excited about how this opportunity is going to further progress those collaborations within and across the network. So hello again, and good to see you. To those of you whom I recognize, and to the others, hello. And I look forward to the possibility of collaborating with you in the future, either directly or maybe even just being in the mere presence of whatever great things you have going on and applauding that effort. So Troy has mentioned several times capacity, and capacity is a manifold term, but as an architect, I'm here most interested in capacity in terms of physical and functional space. And so part of what we're inviting you to do with your submission is to help us better understand the R&D capacity that you would want and that we might be able to provide at both the field stations and a research and design hub facility. And so again, we're looking specifically for information you could provide about physical or functional components of that, kind of what we architects tend to call the programming elements. And so we invite you to describe what you might want, what you might need. Consider it, please, not only in terms of yourself, but for your partners, the partners who will be working with you in the collaboration. You can certainly consider what you will be doing and what you need in order to do that, not only to support the science, the project itself, but also to support any of the people or the staff or the researchers who will be there. And you can also be thinking of it, please, in terms of both concurrent and antecedent activities. What kinds of things are we talking about? Well, I mean, it could be wet labs or dry labs or collaboration areas or offices or administration. It could also be things like a shop or a fabrication area, somewhere you may need for assembly. It may be something more along the lines of a data or IT management type space. It might be defined in terms of technologies or methodologies or modalities, any kind of special equipment that you might need to have with you or have access to. Is there something that you need to bring from elsewhere? Is there something you need to shelter? Is there something you need to stage or assemble or deploy? Can it be outside? What kind of protection would it require, if any? And please, as you identify these things, you can describe them to the best extent possible, either what you know or what you suspect. We're willing to entertain any and all information. We're grateful for it. So it could be something that you could quantify, or it could be simply something that you can qualify or describe. Certain information is, of course, helpful. How many of them do you need? How big are they? Where would you need them? Could they be at the R&D hub facility, or should they be better deployed at the PAA sites, or perhaps a particular site? What might you offer us in terms of information about adjacency or proximity? Does it need to be near something else? Is it okay if there's a distance between them? Would it be for you alone, or is it something you'd be willing to share? How frequently might you need it? Is this something that you're going to need every day, once a week, once a year? Again, while you're considering these things, we'll take information in the best form that you consider available. So you certainly can reference something that you have or something that you've seen. You can submit images or photos. You certainly are welcome to be as specific as possible, but please don't allow a lack of all or even specific information to preclude you from offering what you think you know about it. So kind of like is fine. A space where we can, ... that's also fine. We can always double back and ask or facilitate a discussion that surfaces some of the more specific information that we might need. Or perhaps as we read your description, we can even propose an element that already exists somewhere on the site or sites and see whether that might serve your needs. But we do ask you to be thoughtful, not greedy, right? You don't need to needlessly duplicate a capacity that you have elsewhere, if that's okay. But you may be able to use some of your existing resources that are located elsewhere, your home campus, for example. But we also trust your judgment, right? So the question being, is it necessary or is it critical, or is it significantly better to have this resource or this this programmatic element near you or near where you're doing the research? And if it is, then please do include that. And if you're not sure, then include that. We can dig into that later if we have to. I don't mind being clear about kind of goals and objectives, and so I'd suggest that in this portion of the effort, they're twofold really. One is to assist us as we consider and provide facilities that support your needs. And of course, we want to do that effectively and efficiently and make the highest and best use of the resources and the space that's available. But also, we're convinced that this exercise of you thinking through what you would do, what you could do, particularly in association with partners or collaborators, will further pique your interest and excitement for the possibility of this project and allow us all to be a little more specific about that. So it is allowable, of course. Your answer may be nothing or a provisional nothing, right? It might be that the access to the properties and the properties themselves may be sufficient. But if not, please do consider and then suggest what might be needed or desired beyond the sites, beyond the portfolio and the physical properties. Where and how else can you magnify the benefit and the impact of this opportunity? Troy described the facilities as a system. So at moments, this system allows for engagement of the water itself or the waterfront or of the terrestrial landscape. And we're really looking to maximize the impact of the system and the components within the systems. And so we appreciate your suggestions on how to do that. I've presented a number of questions here, largely rhetorical. But my final question is a practical one. And that's, do you have any questions about what we're asking and what we're requesting or inviting?
The 5 or 6 buildings that were mentioned, is there a way to find out what specific issues that might be existing in those properties? I mean, the idea of elevating properties, that FEMA has talked about it in the past, but you know, other ways of protecting a structure or getting rid of their problems. Could we have some insight about that, those 5 or 6 buildings, what kind of problems they have, or can we visit those places now at this stage, or it's premature?
What do you think, Troy, Sabine?
I'd say it's probably premature to visit the buildings now, but I think it's really valuable for you to be telling us that example of these. This is the kind of characteristics of these properties that I need to know to do my work. So if there are 5 buildings or 10 buildings or whatever, the PAA is going to be a very dynamic portfolio of properties. Some will continue to get flooded and eroded away, and that barrier island off in Guinea, which they own now, will one day not exist anymore. But a new property will come into the system and it may have a house on it. So if there's characteristics of sites that it would help, if you knew that beforehand, that tells you more about the ability to do your research there. That would be helpful for us to know.
I see. So, okay, so at what point in time would the potential proposers have access to 1 or more of those 5 or 6 buildings?
Well, the business winners and as soon as, you know, March, end of March or into May, we'll know if there's going to be some that will be doing work on buildings, and that we'll know that and be able to get out there. Also, Jay Clark just put in, and it's helpful in the chat box, the URL link to a website that it doesn't have complete information on the field stations yet, nor does it have all the field station in it, but it has about 8 or 9 that we're seeing as some of the top prospects right now for work. And you can go and take a look. There's a field station link that you can, there's a aerial photo, video coverage of the property. There's a whole series of photographs, a little bit of information, map, know where it is, things like that. But there's not a lot of environmental characterizations of those sites yet. So that resource exists. Partial resource exists virtually for that, but not all the answers yet.
I see, but how do we know about that particular, how can we access it online? You mentioned the URL.
Yeah, there's one in the chat box. That's that Jay Clark just sent around that has that URL in it.
Okay. So you also mentioned the 100-year, something to the effect that how would things look about 100 years from now, or something like that. So that's going to go beyond the 5 or 6 buildings that are, or 6 or 7 buildings that you're talking about, the so-called workstations or something. Now the 100-year from now ideas, could that include things like a residential structure that does not look at all like what you have nowadays? I'm thinking about something that looks like an igloo, even, some kind of shell structure, which doesn't even have necessarily a firm foundation that it's attached to. Maybe it's something that if there's a lot of water, it just starts to float. And then once the flood is gone, it just goes back to where it was. Are you looking at those kind of quote unquote crazy ideas that somebody may think of, like I'm thinking?
I think we are absolutely thinking about what kind of R&D capacity and would be needed to test those sorts of innovations. And we have field stations and properties to potentially do them on.
Oh, I see.
So,
Okay.
yes. And we did also get another question in the chat box about if one universities have multiple teams fit the industry partners, will the teams have to work together for stage 2, or could there be multiple proposals? That'll be a little bit of a conversation with the businesses too, as they're part of the stakeholder in that decision-making process. And that I could see either approach. I could see the opportunity to say, hey, is there a teaming up here of universities to be on a team working with the companies, or would that not be preferable for? And I appreciate nobody has enough money, so $250,000 may not go far enough to have a huge teams. That the approach could be competing work plans and budgets. So at this stage, I think either approach could be taken.
Is Virginia Sea Grant having any interactions with FEMA?
Certainly through also the broader Sea Grant network. So there are Sea Grant programs in all the coastal and Great Lakes states, and we're a NOAA. The federal partner is NOAA, and there are a number of partnerships between NOAA and FEMA on these topics that Sea Grant gets involved with. I'd say Virginia Sea Grant has not had as much as, say, a Louisiana Sea Grant. That it gets hurt by hurricanes pretty commonly, but the institutional systems are in place to enable some of that.
I see.
That said, I'd also add that many of our partner institutions work very closely with many of the federal agencies, including FEMA, so that in the broader Virginia Sea Grant network, there's a lot of access points there too.
Are you also looking at the coupling of hurricane issues, strong winds in this area, coastal areas, combined with flooding? Or would it be focused strictly on flooding and not combined issues? Because the reason I'm asking that is, if you look at ASC 7, the loads on buildings and structures and so on, they have so-called load combinations. So you have the usual structural load, dead and live loads, or so on and so forth. But you also have to look at combination of wind loading, snow, hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, all of those things with various numerical load factors that you apply to each one of those. Now, I'm not saying that we should consider the worst case scenario where you have a hurricane, flood, snow, the hell's breaking loose, and it's like a Hollywood black and white old movie. But still, the design codes are expecting people, engineers, to look at these some combinations with, higher or lower load factors or amplification factors. So it could be like 50% chance of a hurricane simultaneously with a full-scale flood, or like they had in Puerto Rico, a lot of water and hurricanes, and they had flooding and hurricane combined, and it toppled so many of those, electrical transmission poles, and did damage to the buildings and neighborhoods and so on and so forth. So any potential, are you open to combinations of those things? Probably the combinations cannot be done experimentally out in the field. I mean, for example, are we going to wait for a flood to occur before we can see how effective a proposed idea is to protect a building? And of course, we cannot hope that the hurricane will come at the same time. So that part has to be, computational or theoretical analysis, or theoretical computational modeling of the scenario. So how broad or narrow is this effort that you are perceiving for this entire program?
Virginia Sea Grant is a multi-institutional organization, and there's a lot of strengths and capacity, particularly in the modeling space, and all of our partner institutions. We are not in any way trying to get into that space. Rather, what this is trying to do is to provide a complementary R&D resource, particularly in partnership with industry, that doesn't exist now. And there's work in the broader initiative to be continuing to our own partnerships and existing relationships with legal and policy analysis programming, with engineering professional societies that set codes, to be thinking through how do you facilitate the transfer of an innovation into practice quickly by knowing what codes exist and how these new innovations could be built into those codes and into that guidance system as quickly as possible. So these, and also I think it's fair to recognize, right, that half of the funding on the table for this $1 million call is coming from Go Virginia State Economic Development Organization. So there's a lot of interest in thinking through what kinds of solutions get created that are solving problems now that have longer term commercialization opportunities, which in our space in Virginia, knock on wood, we haven't yet been hit by a hurricane. We're feeling the impacts from a more incremental sea level rise, flooding, increased precipitation, contributing to flooding, saltwater intrusion, land sink. All of those things are the context in Virginia is a little bit different than the context in some other places. So responding to those are important, and is where is the niche that we think these networks of fuel stations and potential R&D capacity could fill. Well, we don't want to keep you just for the sake of keeping you. I think was really valuable and important is to recognize there's an emerging opportunity here. There's some unique capacity that the Commonwealth has that could be made available to companies and universities. And what does it take to fully operationalize that, fully take advantage of that? And So I'll turn to Paul around kind of how he would like you guys to noodle on the ideas and shoot things and ideas you have later back to him. But so hand off to you, Paul.
Again, I don't know what else to ask.
Well, or to take us home. I mean, to set them up for what you'd like them to think about and any feedback and mechanism to get you feedback at this stage.
Oh, well, we will take any and all thought, suggestion, feedback in any format. Anything that you believe begins to convey the information. But we do encourage you to think, especially for yourselves, but also for what would further your collaborative relationship with your partners in terms of what you would need. I mean, in addition to the sites and the access itself, what would allow you to magnify and maximize the fruits of your effort, and what kind of things might that look like?
And some of that is set up, and we're asking for that in the narratives that you're submitting. We will also round back with everybody that's registered and can set with an email that can also include the questions that Paul laid out too, so you can see them more. So thank you so much for your interest in this opportunity. Look forward to seeing submissions. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for briefing us and educating us about the whole thing. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.